They survived a landscape that could erase a human life in minutes. Every step they took depended on signs most people no longer see, and every wrong breath could shift the path beneath them. The desert offered no mercy, yet they learned to read it with calm precision. Tonight you will walk beside them, letting the Sahara reveal the quiet rules it never speaks aloud. So before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, adjust the pillow to fit your head, maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere, and let's begin this journey together tonight. If you were to stand at the edge of the Sahara at daybreak, the first thing you would notice is how sharply the air cuts between cold and heat, as if the land decides every hour whether it wants to spare you or break you. Before the sun rises, the sand feels almost icy, a cold crust that numbs the soles of your feet. But once the light pushes over the horizon, the ground heats so quickly that the air begins to shimmer and every breath turns heavy. This shift does not happen gradually. It happens with ruthless speed, catching the unprepared off guard and draining strength long before thirst arrives. The sudden change between day and night carves away at the senses. In the morning, the cold stiffens fingers until even holding a rope feels difficult. By noon, the heat burns, the skin blinds the eyes and dries the tongue until every step feels heavier than the last. In this place, the body becomes unreliable. Perception bends and blurs under the constant strain. What seems like a straight path becomes a slow deviation, a silent drift toward danger without any dramatic warning. The wind erases everything. Tracks disappear within minutes, sometimes seconds. A caravan may leave a clear trail in the morning, only to find it wiped clean by afternoon. The Sahara does not allow footsteps to last, as if refusing to remember anyone who tries to cross it. Even wheel marks deep and heavy are swallowed quickly by shifting grains. For people unfamiliar with this land, the wind may seem like a simple force of weather. For those who live here, it is a reminder that losing direction can happen without a single mistake. This ability of the desert to erase movement makes orientation a matter of skill rather than instinct. When no tree, no stone, no footprint remains, the traveler must rely on knowledge passed down through generations. A person who loses direction here does not have days to recover, sometimes not even half a day. The sun strips moisture from the body with astonishing speed. A wrong turn, even a small one, can become a death sentence long before nightfall. Many newcomers believe that walking in a straight line is enough. They imagine that the desert is a simple expanse, that persistence alone will keep them aligned. But in a landscape where every direction looks identical, the idea of straight becomes an illusion. Humans naturally veer to one side without noticing, and over thousands of steps that slight deviation becomes a wide arc. This is why those born in the Sahara never trust their bodies. They trust only the signs in the sky, the wind, and the ground. At midday, the sand becomes unbearably bright. Light bounces off the surface with such intensity that even the horizon wavers, creating false lines and false shapes that trick the eyes. The heat radiates upward in shimmering waves, masking distance and turning nearby dunes into indistinct forms. Travelers often misjudge how far they have walked or how far they still need to go. Standing still for too long is dangerous. The ground burns, the sun presses down, and the mind begins to drift in the glare. Night brings a different kind of threat. Sound disappears into the open space and the cold creeps in, quickly numbing fingers, feet, and thought. Even seasoned nomads become small under the weight of that darkness. The stars are their guides, but clouds and dust storms can blanket the sky without warning. When the night hides the constellations, even experienced travelers must decide between waiting in the freezing dark or risking movement without a reference point. Either choice can take a toll. The danger of losing direction rarely arrives dramatically. It comes from small details, a gust of wind that makes someone shield their eyes, a brief moment of glare that hides the horizon, a tiny shift in footing that changes the angle of the next step. The desert does not punish immediately. It lets the mistake grow unnoticed until the distance becomes too great to undo. By the time a traveler realizes they have strayed, the heat may already be tightening around their chest. For those who call this land home, the desert's temperament is something learned early and respected deeply. Each morning begins with studying the sky, sensing the wind, and checking how the sand has shifted during the night. No one moves without understanding what waits beyond the nearest dunes. The Sahara does not forgive those who rely on hope. It rewards only those who observe, remember, and adapt. There is no place where silence feels as heavy as it does here. The vastness stretches in all directions, and every choice matters, because every wrong choice consumes water, time, and breath. In such a harsh environment, ancient navigation skills were not simply helpful. They were the thin line between life and death. People learned these skills not from books, but from the survival and mistakes of those who walked before them. A single misjudgment could erase a life just as easily as the wind erases footprints. The Sahara is both vast and indifferent. It offers nothing freely, and it keeps nothing for long. Its shifting temperatures, erasing winds, and deceptive distances form a world where direction is fragile, and survival depends on understanding the land in ways outsiders often cannot imagine. In a land defined by violent temperature, shifts, and disappearing paths, survival rests on knowledge rather than chance. Beyond this harsh beginning, the desert holds clues that only attentive travelers can recognize. And somewhere within that silence, a deeper way of reading the landscape begins to reveal itself. Knowing where to walk in a land without boundaries requires a kind of attention that most people never learn. In the Sahara, there is no line on the ground, no distinct landmark rising above the emptiness, and no sound to hint at direction. Everything looks the same at first glance. Endless sand, low dunes, distant haze, a sky that feels too large to offer guidance. Yet the people who live here manage to find their way with a certainty that seems impossible to outsiders. They read the desert not as a blank space, but as a landscape filled with signs so subtle that only experience can reveal them. To recognize direction in a world of identical dunes, one must first abandon the idea that nature should provide obvious markers. The Sahara does not offer that kind of clarity. Instead, it requires patience and repetition. Travelers learn to observe how the light falls across slopes at different times of day, how shadows stretch in ways that hint at orientation, and how the smallest ridges show the wind's favorite path. These details do not announce themselves loudly. They remain quiet, nearly invisible, until someone has walked the desert long enough for patterns to emerge. One of the first skills passed from elders to children is understanding how dunes form and reshape. The wind comes from predictable directions during certain seasons, carving slopes that lean one way or another. A steep angle might tell a traveler which side faces prevailing winds, while a gentler slope may hint at the opposite direction. This knowledge is not instinct. It is built through observation, failures, corrections, and countless journeys made under harsh conditions. What appears effortless is the result of a lifetime of learning. The desert's brightness hides the horizon, making it easy to drift without noticing. But those who have grown up under this sun know how to look past the glare. They narrow their gaze, finding edges in the dunes that remain stable, even as the light shifts. They memorize the angle of the morning shadow, the way sand glows at midday, and how the color cools when the sun begins to sink. Each of these changes marks time and direction. A person unfamiliar with the Sahara sees only light. A person shaped by it sees orientation. Direction is not only visual. The wind carries information as well. Its temperature, its pressure against the skin, and even the consistency of the grains it lifts can indicate where a traveler stands in relation to known routes. During certain months, warm winds drift from the south, while drier, sharper ones arrive from the north. Nomads learn to feel these differences without discussing them, because the skill becomes part of daily survival. They walk with their senses alert to every shift, knowing that a slight change may warn them they have veered away from the intended path. Even without technology, navigation becomes a form of memory. Families pass down descriptions of routes, not as precise instructions, but as stories. A particular journey might be remembered through the shape of a dune line, the sound of the wind at a certain time of year, or the presence of a type of sand that sticks lightly to the skin. These memories accumulate across generations, forming a collective understanding of the desert that allows people to move confidently even when nothing familiar appears in sight. To modernize, this skill may look like intuition. Travelers who watch nomads choose a direction with apparent certainty often imagine that they feel the right way, relying on some mysterious internal compass. But what appears instinctive is in fact the result of meticulous training, not the kind taught in classrooms, but the kind learned through necessity. Children watch adults walk, adults correct their younger companions, and mistakes are remembered because the consequences can be severe. With time, the knowledge becomes so ingrained that it no longer feels like conscious thought. There is a calmness in how these travelers move through the desert. They do not hesitate or double back nervously. They do not stop to question whether the next dune will look like the last one. They proceed with the understanding that the desert reveals more to someone who observes without rushing. This quiet confidence is not arrogance. It is survival. The Sahara rewards patience and punishes doubt. To linger too long in uncertainty is to lose precious water and light. What makes these navigation skills remarkable is not only their precision, but also their simplicity. There is no equipment to break, no instrument to misread, no map to tear. Everything exists in the environment itself. The sun's path, the wind's movement, the dune's shape, and the ground's temperature each provide pieces of information. Alone they tell little. Together, they form a map more adaptable than anything drawn on paper. It is easy to imagine that such knowledge belongs to another world entirely. In a time dominated by satellites and digital tools, the idea of navigating with nothing but observation feels almost ancient. Yet, in the Sahara, where technology is often useless, these methods remain reliable. They require nothing but a trained mind, a steady eye, and a willingness to listen to the land. These skills endure because the desert has not changed. Its challenges remain the same, and so do the ways of surviving it. For people who have walked its dunes for generations, the lack of maps or devices is not a disadvantage. It is a reminder that the land itself provides every clue needed if one knows how to see them. In a land where every dune looks identical, survival rests on knowledge carried quietly through generations. Beyond these inherited methods lies another way of reading the desert, one that begins with the sand itself. And as the ground reveals its hidden patterns, the journey grows far more intricate than it first appears. Recognizing the landscape in the Sahara requires studying forms that change constantly, yet reveal their logic to those who watch long enough. Every dune carries marks left by wind, temperature, and time. And although these marks shift from day to day, their overall patterns remain steady enough for skilled travelers to read. To outsiders, dunes appear interchangeable curves of sand, stretching endlessly across the horizon with no distinguishing features. But for people who walk them daily, each dune has a character, a direction, and a silent history that helps guide the journey. A dune slope offers one of the earliest lessons taught to children growing up in the desert. Wind carves steeper faces on the side where it blows strongest, leaving a gentler incline on the opposite side where sand slips downward. This contrast is subtle, but once recognized, it becomes a reliable indicator of direction. A steep face might hint towards seasonal winds, while the smoother one could suggest the path they have traveled. The knowledge is not theoretical. It is built through years of watching dunes form, collapse, stretch, and rebuild under shifting air currents. Beyond slope, wind direction leaves delicate signatures on the sand surface. Ripples, fine and parallel, form lines that indicate where the wind has passed during the night. These ripples may seem fragile, but their pattern remains long enough to be read by early morning travelers. Nomads often walk before sunrise, partly to catch these details before the day's heat or sudden gusts blur them. By observing the orientation of the ripple lines, they gain immediate clues about how the land has been shaped in the last hours. Yet dunes are not always simple forms. Certain areas contain irregular shapes, cracked surfaces, exposed stones, or small clusters of harder sand that keep their position longer than the shifting grains around them. These irregularities become markers. A crack shaped like a crescent might be remembered as part of a route taken months earlier. A stone protruding from a slope may serve as a reference point when the traveler returns to the same region. These features are never large or dramatic. Often they are so small that a person unfamiliar with the desert would step over them without noticing. But to the trained eye, they are signposts. Over time, travelers build a mental archive of these shapes. They memorize the way one dune leans toward another, how a valley between dunes curves slightly south, or how a certain ridge resembles a broken ridge from another journey. This mental mapping becomes deeply personal, growing richer with each crossing. No written map could hold such detail because the desert shifts, and only memory can adapt fast enough to remain useful. The mind learns to stitch together points of familiarity, even when the environment rearranges them. When the wind reshapes a dune, the overall landscape still holds traces of its older form. A traveler might notice that a valley once shallow has deepened slightly, or that a dune once tall has flattened into a longer wave. These transformations do not render old knowledge useless. Instead, they refine it. The desert teaches its observers to hold multiple versions of each landscape in mind, what it was, what it has become, and how it might change again. This layered awareness is what allows experienced nomads to find stability in a land that refuses to remain still. Some dunes are known for their unusual formations. A dune with a diagonal ridge, a flat-topped crest, or a sharp turn at its base becomes part of the collective memory of desert travelers. These distinctive forms are discussed among groups, shared with children, and woven into stories that both teach and warn. A traveler might hear tales about a dune shaped like a spear or one that curves like a sleeping animal. These descriptions, though simple, become practical anchors for navigation. They embed visual cues in memory, so that even at a distance the traveler can recognize a familiar form. The interplay of sunlight and sand further enhances these cues. At dawn and dusk, shadows stretch across dune faces in ways that reveal depth and curvature. A ridge barely visible at midday may become sharply outlined in the low light. Travelers often pause during these moments to study the terrain carefully, committing the contrast of shadow and brightness to memory. These images become part of the mental atlas they carry, helping them reorient themselves when the midday glare washes out detail. To build this internal map, one must remain attentive. The desert does not tolerate distraction. A traveler who walks without studying the dunes risks losing the thread of the route because dunes repeat themselves only in broad patterns, never in exact form. Subtle differences, an extra curve, a break in the ridge, a small slope of hardened sand distinguish one area from another. Missing these differences creates confusion that grows quickly in such an open landscape. The skill of reading dunes also depends on pace. Moving too quickly makes it easy to overlook markers. Nomads walk steadily, but not hurriedly, allowing time to register each detail before stepping forward. This rhythm preserves awareness, giving the mind space to compare what it sees with the map it carries. The process is quiet, almost meditative, shaped by a land that demands both caution and confidence. In the end, dune shapes serve as a map, not written on paper, but imprinted in memory. They guide travelers through uncertainty, offering orientation in a place where the ground itself is always shifting. These mental maps, refined through generations, allow people to walk with clarity, where others see only confusion. In this shifting landscape, the silent curves of each dune become a guide for those who learn to watch carefully. Behind every slope and ridge lies a memory that ties the traveler to familiar ground. As new details surface from the sand, the land begins to reveal paths that remain invisible to those who have not learned to see. The sun becomes both a burden and a guide for anyone crossing the Sahara. Its movement across the sky is one of the few constants in a land where almost everything else shifts without warning. Travelers learn early that watching the sun is not simply about avoiding heat. It is a method of orientation, a way to understand direction when no fixed landmarks exist. The sky, unlike the dunes below, never rearranges itself overnight. It offers a steady arc from east to west, and within that arc lies the foundation of desert navigation. People who live in the Sahara do not just glance at the sun. They track its path with quiet precision. At dawn, they note where the first light appears, measuring the strength of the glow and the angle at which it stretches across the sand. This moment marks east, not as a concept, but as a lived direction, something their bodies come to recognize instinctively after years of observation. As the sun rises, its path reveals the orientation of the landscape. Shadows stretch away from the light, creating temporary markers that guide travelers until the sun climbs too high for shadows to remain long. These early shadows serve a purpose beyond simple direction. They help estimate distance. A traveler might watch how long a shadow remains before shrinking into the brightness of mid-morning, using that interval to determine how far they have walked. It is not exact, but it is consistent, and consistency matters more than precision when the land itself offers no stable reference points. As the sun moves, travelers adjust their pace, their posture, and their path accordingly, always aware that the heat will increase with each passing hour. At midday, shadows nearly disappear, collapsing into thin, dark lines at the feet of those moving across the sand. This is the most difficult time to navigate because the light is unrelenting, flattening the terrain and making distances harder to judge. Travelers know better than to rely on visual cues during these hours. Instead, they shift their awareness to the position of the sun overhead. They track how it leans slightly toward the west as time passes, using that gradual tilt to orient themselves despite the glare. Walking in the heat of the day requires conserving energy. One of the ways nomads achieve this is by following the direction of the shortest shadow they can find. A short shadow indicates that the walker is oriented correctly relative to the sun's position. Turning too far in either direction lengthens the shadow, signaling that they have drifted off course. This method seems simple, but it demands constant attention. Even a slight shift in angle can change the shadow's length enough to warn the traveler they are moving inefficiently or heading toward greater heat exposure. Observing the sun also means remembering its rhythm. Travelers memorize when the sun stands at its highest point, when it begins to soften, and when the harsh glare gives way to the warmer tones of afternoon. These changes become markers not just of time but of orientation. By mid-afternoon, shadows lengthen again, pointing eastward now, and offering another set of temporary lines drawn across the sand. These lines help travelers recalibrate their route, adjusting for any subtle deviations that may have occurred during the exhausting midday hours. The relationship between sun and sand creates a predictable cycle, and desert people learn to read that cycle as if it were a clock built into the landscape. Experienced travelers can tell the approximate hour solely from the angle of light hitting their faces, or the way the heat shifts against their skin. Such awareness does not arise from instinct. It is refined through countless days spent walking under the same sky, noting the variations in brightness and temperature that others might ignore. There is also a practical advantage to a deep understanding of the sun's path, managing physical endurance. The Sahara demands efficiency. Travelers who misjudge the sun's position may waste energy walking during the wrong hours or heading in a direction that exposes them to unnecessary fatigue. By following the shortest shadow and aligning themselves with the sun's predictable arc, desert people conserve strength, reduce heat, stress, and maintain a steady pace. This technique becomes especially important for long journeys, where every step must be measured and purposeful. Sun observation also complements other navigation methods. Dune shapes, wind patterns, and star positions all contribute to a traveler's understanding of location. But during the day, the sun is the anchor. It confirms or corrects other cues. If a traveler senses that the wind direction feels slightly unusual or that a dune appears unfamiliar, they can check the sun's position to verify whether they have drifted off course. In this way, the sun becomes a stabilizing presence, offering clarity in a landscape defined by movement. The discipline of tracking sunlight transforms uncertainty into direction. It demands presence, patience, and the willingness to study each hour as a lesson. Those who rely on modern tools might struggle to understand this approach, yet for the people of the Sahara, it remains both practical and deeply reliable. Technology can fail, memory rarely does, and the sun never changes its path. By sunset, the desert softens. Shadows stretch long across the sand, once again pointing the way back toward the east and preparing travelers for the coming night. The sun sinks steadily, marking the close of the day with the same quiet precision it offered from the beginning. Navigation does not end when the light fades. It simply shifts to the stars, but the sun's guidance leaves its imprint long after darkness settles. Throughout the long daylight hours, the sun's movement becomes a silent guide for those who know how to read its message. Each shift of shadow and angle offers direction in a land where certainty is rare. The approach of dusk brings a quiet signal that another method of navigation is waiting to take over. Wind becomes one of the most reliable guides in the Sahara, a constant presence that shapes dunes, carries sand, and whispers direction to those who know how to interpret its patterns. To someone unfamiliar with the desert, the wind may seem chaotic, a shifting force that offers little clarity. But to the people who live their entire lives under its influence, it provides steady information about orientation, season, and the changing character of the land. Its rhythm, temperature, and sound form a language that travelers learn to understand long before they attempt long crossings. During certain months, the wind arrives from predictable directions. Seasonal winds blow consistently enough that experienced nomads can tell the cardinal orientation simply by feeling the pressure against their skin or noting the angle at which loose sand lifts along the ground. These winds do not announce themselves with dramatic force. Instead, they carry a subtle steadiness, nudging the dunes in familiar directions year after year. By observing how the sand drifts, how the air warms or cools, and how grains skim lightly across the surface, travelers confirm whether they are facing the right direction or straying from it. The wind also reveals changes in terrain. A cooler breeze might signal proximity to higher ground or areas where shade persists longer during the day. A warmer, heavier current can indicate lower terrain or zones where heat intensifies. Nomads do not rely on sight alone. They let the movement of air inform them of what lies ahead. They learn to sense when the wind carries dryness from open plains, when it carries faint moisture from regions where underground water may rest, and when it shifts in tone as it brushes against different kinds of sand. However, not all wind offers guidance. Some winds arrive too suddenly for travelers to fully prepare. These are the winds that grow into sandstorms, transforming familiar landscapes into distorted spaces where direction becomes difficult to maintain. A sandstorm does not simply obscure vision, it changes the very character of the land. Sound fades, light dims, and the horizon dissolves into swirling grains that move in thick currents. It becomes nearly impossible to see more than a few steps ahead. For those unprepared, the storm erases direction. Recognizing the early signs of a sandstorm becomes a critical skill. Seasoned desert travelers learn to notice when the wind sharpens, when its warmth shifts unnaturally, or when a faint haze appears along the horizon long before the storm reaches them. They read these signals quickly, understanding that hesitation can cost valuable minutes needed to find shelter or adjust their path. The onset of a sandstorm may seem sudden to outsiders, but those deeply attuned to the land sense it building long before it arrives. When a storm hits, visibility drops sharply, and the wind's voice becomes the most reliable guide remaining. Some nomadic groups listen carefully to the tone of the wind during these moments. The storm's direction of movement helps them determine where they stand in relation to their intended path. A storm approaching from the west might push them east if they continue walking. A storm sweeping from the north may warn them that they have begun drifting south unintentionally. This method is not exact, but in a landscape swallowed by swirling sand, even approximate knowledge can decide survival. The sound of the wind changes during a storm, shifting between low vibrating hums and higher, sharper tones as it interacts with dunes and land formations. Skilled listeners can estimate their orientation based on these shifts. It requires years of practice to distinguish one tone from another, and even longer to understand what each variation means. Children in desert communities learn to sit still and listen during windy days, absorbing the differences in sound until they become second nature. Over time, these subtle noises become as clear as spoken instructions. Outside sandstorms, wind helps travelers conserve energy. Walking against a strong current wastes strength, while aligning one's path slightly diagonal to the wind allows for smoother movement. Nomads adjust their bodies and steps to reduce resistance, letting the wind guide rather than hinder them. This technique becomes especially important during long journeys, where maintaining endurance can be the difference between reaching shelter and collapsing under extreme heat. Wind also assists in confirming previously observed cues. If a traveler notes that dune slopes suggest a certain direction, but the wind feels wrong for that season, it may imply they have misinterpreted the terrain. If the wind matches the expected seasonal pattern, it reinforces their sense of location. This layered approach, combining dune shapes, sun position, and wind behavior, creates a reliable navigation system built from natural elements rather than tools. Yet the wind remains unpredictable enough to demand respect. The desert teaches its inhabitants that confidence must always be balanced with caution. Familiar breezes can shift suddenly, bringing colder or hotter currents that hint at environmental changes ahead. A traveler who senses these differences without reacting may find themselves walking into terrain they did not intend to enter. The desert does not forgive complacency, especially when the wind begins to behave in ways that feel unfamiliar. Understanding the wind becomes not only a method of navigation, but also a form of relationship with the desert itself. Travelers learn to listen more than they speak, to observe more than they assume, and to trust subtle cues over dramatic signs. In the emptiness of the Sahara, the wind carries more information than any map could contain, shaping the journey with every shift of air. Through each steady current and sudden surge, the wind offers clues that guide those who know how to interpret its movement. Changes in tone, temperature, and force reveal direction when the land seems to dissolve into drifting sand. The deeper this understanding grows, the more clearly the desert begins to reveal its hidden paths. Night in the Sahara offers a silence that feels heavier than anything the daytime heat can impose. When the sun finally sinks below the dunes, the desert cools quickly, and the sky opens into a vast field of darkness scattered with stars. For travelers, this darkness is not an obstacle but a guide. The night sky becomes a map more stable than any drawn lines on parchment, because the stars do not shift with the wind or vanish with the movement of sand. They remain steady, quiet, and patient, the perfect companions for navigation. Those who walk the Sahara at night begin by recognizing the major constellations. These star groups do not need to be memorized all at once. They are learned gradually night after night until their shapes become as familiar as the dunes themselves. One of the most essential is the constellation that contains the North Star. This star does not move across the sky like the others. It remains fixed almost perfectly in place, a still point around which the night seems to rotate. For generations, desert travelers have used it to determine where the north lies, trusting its steadiness when the land below turns confusing in the dark. Finding the North Star requires understanding the constellation surrounding it, not just searching for a single bright point. Travelers learn to locate the larger formation first, using its outer stars as a frame. Once the frame is clear, their eyes settle on the central star, which becomes their anchor. Even when clouds drift in front of the sky, experienced nomads can often sense where the star should be, filling gaps in their view through memory and habit. To them, the North Star is not simply light, it is direction. Other stars supplement this guidance. Certain bright stars rise in predictable positions during specific seasons, and nomads learn to associate these stars with shifts in weather, wind patterns, and migratory routes. A star rising earlier in the evening may signal the approach of colder nights, while a faint cluster appearing in the eastern sky may warn that seasonal winds will soon change direction. These subtle cues serve as reminders that the desert's environment is in constant motion, but the sky above remains a dependable counterbalance. Tracking the movement of stars through the night allows travelers to estimate the passage of time. As the sky rotates, constellations appear to drift slowly from east to west. This movement is not random, but follows a steady rhythm that desert people internalize. By noting how far a constellation has shifted, a traveler can understand not only how long they have been walking, but how far they may have traveled. It is not measured in numbers, but in familiarity, how high a star sits above the horizon, how its angle aligns with a dune's slope, how the darkness around it softens or sharpens. The desert sky is clearer than most places on Earth. Far from city lights, stars appear sharper, brighter, and more numerous, giving the impression that the sky has more depth than usual. Travelers use this clarity to their advantage, picking out smaller constellations that might be invisible elsewhere. Some of these constellations serve as secondary guides, offering correction if a traveler misjudges direction by relying on a single star. The desert teaches not to depend on one sign alone. Confirmation must always come from multiple cues. Over time, the knowledge becomes instinctive. Children growing up in nomadic communities spend evenings lying beside their families, listening as elders point out stars and explain their meanings. The lessons are simple at first, recognizing a bright star, understanding which direction it leans toward, but gradually expand into a full system of navigation. Young travelers learn to imagine invisible lines between stars, forming paths they can rely on, even when no physical path is present on the sand. Nighttime travel requires calmness. Unlike daytime journeys where heat pressures every step, walking beneath the stars demands patience and quiet observation. The cold can be sharp, the dunes can appear even more uniform, and distances can become harder to judge. But the night sky compensates for these challenges by offering clarity that the sun's glare cannot provide. Each star becomes a point of certainty in an otherwise uncertain environment. Travelers move steadily, looking up, often letting the sky adjust their route when the land offers no clues. The seasonal movement of stars adds another layer of knowledge. Certain formations shift slightly from month to month, and travelers memorize these changes. A constellation sitting higher in the sky than usual may mean the season is turning, which affects where water might be found or how the winds might behave. Travelers understand that the sky's changes are slow and predictable, unlike the sudden transformations of sand under strong winds. This predictability allows them to prepare for long journeys well in advance. Listening to the night also becomes part of the process. Without the noise of daytime winds, travelers can hear subtle differences in how air moves across dunes. These sounds confirm what the stars suggest. If the stars indicate a northern direction but the wind seems warmer than expected, the traveler may reconsider their route. The desert constantly offers small hints, and skilled travelers weave them together like threads in a larger pattern. Navigating by starlight is not romantic or mysterious for those who depend on it. It is practical. It is survival. The sky provides what the desert hides: consistency. Travelers trust it because it does not shift overnight or change shape with the seasons. Even when clouds obscure the view, the memory of the sky remains strong enough to bridge the gap until the stars appear again. Those who rely on the stars do not see them as distant or abstract. They see them as markers etched into a dark canvas, guiding every step across a land that resists being known. In a place where dunes move and winds erase every trace, the stars offer permanence, something the desert cannot take away. Through the quiet hours of night, the stars become steady points that guide travelers across shifting sands. Each constellation reveals direction and season to those who have learned to study the sky with patience. Once these patterns become familiar, the darkness no longer hides the path, but illuminates it in its own silent way. Night settles over the Sahara with a certainty that feels almost ceremonial. As the last traces of sunlight disappear behind the dunes, the desert transforms into an open observatory where nothing interrupts the expanse of sky. Without the glow of cities or the haze of artificial light, every star appears sharper, brighter, and closer than it would anywhere else. The silence deepens, and the cool air spreads across the sand, making the night feel vast but strangely intimate. This is when the sky reveals itself, fully stretching from horizon to horizon, without obstruction, offering guidance to anyone who has learned to understand its patterns. In this darkness, the stars become more than distant lights. They form a map that remains steady above the shifting terrain, a guide that does not rely on landmarks or roads. To the people who cross the Sahara, the sky holds information as precise as any instrument, and they learn to rely on it long before they can read written symbols or follow detailed charts. The constellations turn into companions, whose movements become predictable, offering reassurance in a landscape where almost nothing stays the same. The desert by its nature hides its tracks. Winds erase footprints, dunes reshape themselves, and visible paths vanish quickly. Beneath such conditions, the sky becomes the only constant reference. A traveler who lifts their eyes upward in the quiet hours of the night finds lines and shapes that remain unchanged through generations. These shapes become roots, and their positions become indicators of direction. The stars do not mislead. Their honesty is one of the few guarantees the desert provides. To understand this celestial map, one must spend countless nights watching the sky with focus rather than fascination. A child born into a nomadic family begins learning early, lying on the cool sand beside elders who point to constellations and explain their roles. Lessons are not rushed. The night offers enough time, and the silence encourages slow attention. A bright star low on the horizon might become the reference for west, while a cluster rising sharply becomes a sign of seasonal change. The sky turns into a classroom where memory grows stronger through repetition. A young camel herder may recognize patterns long before he understands the broader meaning behind them. His eyes, accustomed to the darkness, begin picking out details that visitors would never notice. His hearing sharpens to the stillness of night. His body adjusts to the pace of nocturnal travel, and gradually the stars become familiar markers. To him, identifying the North Star becomes as natural as spotting a familiar dune. Over time, he learns to interpret the angles between constellations, the height of certain stars above the horizon, and the subtle arcs traced across the night. His understanding becomes instinctive, and this instinct keeps him safe on long journeys. Travelers trust the stars, even when the land provides no clues. During calm nights, they walk with steady steps, letting the constellations align their route. During colder nights, they wrap themselves tightly and continue moving, guided not by warmth or distraction, but by the unwavering clarity above them. In the deepest hours, when the air grows colder and the desert becomes eerily quiet, the sky feels almost protective. Its stillness contrasts sharply with the unpredictable sand below, reminding travelers that not everything in the desert shifts. Those who do not understand the stars may see only scattered points of light. But for those who depend on them, each star holds purpose. Some offer direction, some announce the passage of time, and others signal the arrival of new seasons. Travelers read the sky like a scroll laid open above them, always visible, always dependable. They know which star will rise first after sunset, and which one will appear just before dawn. They can predict the movement of entire constellations through the night, and adjust their journey accordingly. The desert sky also carries emotional weight. For those alone on long routes, the stars provide company. For families traveling together, they provide reassurance. For elders teaching the young, they provide continuity across generations. Every traveler remembers the first time they correctly identified a constellation on their own, the first moment the sky made sense, and the first journey guided successfully by starlight. These memories remain vivid because they mark transitions from uncertainty to understanding. The absence of city lights intensifies the clarity. There is nothing to blur the horizon or soften the brilliance of the stars. The desert's darkness becomes an asset rather than a limitation. Where others might struggle to interpret the sky, desert people thrive. They read patterns invisible to outsiders, find direction where most would feel lost, and build a sense of orientation that feels almost instinctive. Yet this instinct is not inherited, it is learned. What appears to be natural ability is actually the result of years of slow, patient observation. The night sky offers more accuracy than any primitive compass. A constellation may tilt or rise depending on the season, providing an additional layer of orientation. The North Star's fixed position becomes the ultimate guarantee of direction. Even moving constellations follow predictable paths, allowing travelers to confirm their route by cross-checking multiple reference points. This ancient method does not require tools, only discipline and familiarity with the sky's rhythm. To outsiders, it seems extraordinary that a child herding camels could navigate by starlight as confidently as a trained explorer using a sophisticated device. Yet in the Sahara, the roles reverse. Technology may fail, but the stars do not. Their patterns remain constant even across lifetimes. Those who learn to read them hold an advantage that cannot be taken away by weather, wind, or time. Beneath the deep silence of night, the sky reveals its steady patterns to anyone patient enough to study them. Each constellation offers direction with a clarity that the desert's shifting sands cannot provide. As familiarity grows, darkness turns into a landscape marked with invisible paths waiting to be followed. Vegetation in the Sahara appears so rarely that every plant carries meaning. In a landscape dominated by sand and wind, even the smallest patch of green becomes a quiet signal that something beneath the surface is different. Travelers who learn to read these fragile signs gain another layer of orientation, one formed not from the stars or the dunes, but from life itself, thin, stretched, and persistent. The desert hides its resources well, yet plants reveal more than they intend, offering hints about water direction and human presence. Most plants that survive in the Sahara grow where underground moisture remains. These hidden pockets of water may lie deep below the surface or gather in places where the sand shifts less dramatically. Observing the amount and distribution of vegetation helps travelers determine direction, especially when the terrain offers few other clues. In certain regions, plant clusters tend to grow slightly thicker toward the north, where underground reservoirs rest closer to the surface. For those familiar with the desert's behavior, recognizing this pattern helps align their path when uncertainty grows. Trees, particularly hardy species like the acacia, provide additional information. Acacia trees often lean gently in the direction of the prevailing winds, a posture formed slowly over years of continuous pressure. By studying the angle of the trunk or the shape of the canopy, travelers can identify the direction of consistent westward winds. These details may seem subtle to newcomers, but to those who rely on such signs, the tilt of a branch becomes as clear as a compass needle. Even isolated trees standing alone in open sand can speak quietly of the wind's long history. Vegetation does more than signal direction. It also indicates the presence of human activity. Areas where people frequently stop leave behind traces that plants respond to over time. A tree with a fuller canopy, or a patch of shrubs growing slightly thicker, may mark a place where travelers have rested, watered their animals, or dug shallow pits to reach damp sand. Such spots become informal markers not intentionally created, but formed through repeated use. Over the years, these areas stand out as subtle beacons, suggesting that others have passed through the same route. A tree with dense shade becomes a privilege in the desert, and nomads often gather beneath such shelter during the hottest hours. The soil beneath these trees retains moisture slightly better because it is shielded from direct sunlight. Plants surrounding these areas grow in a way that hints at human patterns. Flattened ground, slight changes in soil color, or faint marks that remain even after winds sweep across the surface. Understanding these signs allows travelers to identify rest stops or determine whether they remain on paths used by others. Shrubs and small grasses also reveal information. In some areas, grasses appear only where rainwater has recently passed, forming narrow lines that trace seasonal streams. These lines act like temporary guides across stretches of otherwise featureless sand. Even when the rains have long disappeared, the memory of their presence remains etched into the arrangement of small plants. For those crossing wide plains, such traces help distinguish between areas that shift frequently and areas that hold greater stability. Plant color also communicates subtle messages. A slightly greener tone may indicate deeper roots reaching toward moisture, while duller, brittle plants may signal drier regions. Travelers observe these variations without haste, letting the desert's slow rhythm guide their interpretations. The Sahara does not allow quick conclusions. Each sign must be read in context, compared with other clues, and approached with patience. When vegetation matches expectations based on wind stars and terrain, confidence grows. When it contradicts them, caution deepens. Vegetation becomes even more meaningful near rocky regions, where sand does not move as freely. Plants growing around stone outcrops often cluster in ways that reflect how water collects after rare rains. Observing these clusters helps travelers anticipate the shape of the landscape ahead, how steep slopes may rise, where shadows fall during the day, and how the terrain influences wind patterns. The patterns are understated, but they remain consistent enough to offer practical guidance. In the vastness of the Sahara, the smallest hints matter. A lone bush standing against the wind may indicate a hidden underground channel. A thin line of shrubs may trace the remnants of an old caravan road. The desert does not speak loudly. It relies on quiet signals that demand steady attention. Over time, travelers learn to recognize these signals instinctively, turning fragmented patches of vegetation into pieces of a larger map. Children in nomadic families begin learning these signs early. While adults observe the horizon or count their steps, children are encouraged to notice how plants cling to life in different parts of the desert. They learn which species grow where moisture lies, which ones lean into the wind, and which ones appear near human settlements. These lessons form the foundation for deeper knowledge later in life, when navigation becomes essential for survival. Plants also help travelers judge distance indirectly. A cluster of trees visible on the horizon may seem close, but can be far away due to the desert's distorted sense of scale. Learning how vegetation appears from various distances helps travelers avoid misjudging how long they must walk to reach shade or water. Understanding this prevents exhaustion and wasted effort resources that cannot be spared in such an unforgiving environment. The presence of vegetation becomes especially important when wandering outside familiar routes. Even a single healthy tree may suggest a safer direction than the surrounding barren land. Travelers weigh these cues carefully, trusting them not as isolated signs, but as part of a network of natural information woven across the desert. Through scattered plants and thin patches of shade, the desert reveals delicate markers for those who pay attention. Each leaf, branch, and cluster becomes a quiet reminder that direction can be found even in the most barren landscape. When this awareness deepens, travelers begin to notice living traces where others see only empty sand. Animals in the Sahara live with a level of instinct shaped entirely by the desert itself. They survive not by resisting the environment, but by adapting to every shift in wind, heat, and scarcity. For travelers, watching these animals becomes another form of navigation. Their movements reveal what the land hides their habits, expose what the dunes erase, and their instincts point towards safety in a place where certainty is fragile. Observing them requires stillness and patience, but those who learn to read these behaviors gain insight that no map can offer. Camels in particular embody the desert's memory. They move with calm precision, carrying an awareness of routes learned through generations. A camel does not wander. It recognizes the feel of familiar terrain beneath its feet, senses changes in the air, and adjusts its pace based on distant landmarks invisible to human eyes. When left to choose their direction, camels often begin drifting toward known paths or camps, guided by instincts sharpened through constant travel. Nomads trust this behavior deeply. A camel walking with quiet confidence may know the route better than its rider, and allowing the animal to lead can become a way to correct human error. There are moments in long journeys when the horizon grows indistinct, when sandstorms or heat distort the landscape. During such times, camels often become the most reliable guides. Their familiarity with subtle shifts in terrain allows them to recognize trails long covered by moving dunes. Their sense of smell detects faint traces of settlements or old pastures, helping them orient themselves even when visibility collapses. To observers, their steps may seem slow, but this slowness hides a careful certainty that only desert-born creatures possess. Other animals offer additional clues. Tracks left by wildlife become practical markers. In remote areas, travelers scan the ground for footprints, knowing that certain animals move consistently toward water sources. Antelope tracks may point toward distant springs. Bird prints may lead to shaded valleys, Even the faint patterns of smaller creatures suggest directions worth considering. In a landscape where water is scarce, following these signs becomes an essential part of understanding the terrain. Tracks also reveal time. Fresh prints indicate recent activity, which suggests water may still be accessible. Older, wind-softened tracks warn that the animals passed long ago, and whatever resource they sought may have already disappeared. Reading the age of tracks demands experience. Travelers examine the crispness of edges, the depth of the imprint, and the angle of surrounding sand. A print softened by drifting grains may be only hours old, while one nearly erased might belong to a past season. Patterns in insect behavior create another quiet form of guidance. Insects adapt quickly to changes in wind direction, temperature, and moisture. When travelers notice clusters of insects moving steadily in one direction, they understand that these tiny movements may point toward areas where air rises gently from underground water. This phenomenon may seem subtle, yet in the desert even the smallest hints matter. Insects follow wind currents instinctively, their delicate bodies responding to shifts that humans cannot immediately detect. Observing them teaches travelers how the air flows across the dunes. In some regions, swarms of insects appear only during certain hours, flying low across the sand in coordinated waves. These movements reflect the direction of the prevailing winds and help confirm orientation when landmarks cannot be trusted. Even their absence can be informative. A lack of insect activity might signal rising heat or an approaching storm, prompting travelers to reconsider their pace. The desert's creatures behave according to patterns refined over centuries, and these patterns form an unspoken language for those who know how to watch. Birds, though less common in the open desert, offer powerful clues when they appear. Their flight paths often align with known routes to water or temporary lakes. A bird circling repeatedly may indicate a source hidden beneath layers of sand. Travelers interpret such movements carefully, watching how long the bird circles, how high it flies, and whether it descends suddenly. These details help distinguish between random motion and purposeful signaling. Even migratory birds passing far overhead reveal seasonal changes that affect navigation. At night, listening to animals becomes equally important. The distant sound of camels can confirm the presence of a caravan ahead. The quiet rustle of small mammals may indicate vegetated areas where moisture lingers. Silence too speaks. A sudden absence of animal activity may signal a shift in the weather or an approaching disturbance. Travelers learn to recognize these changes not with fear, but with attention, understanding that the desert communicates through rhythms rather than warnings. In many nomadic families, children grow up observing animals before they learn to interpret stars or dunes. They watch how camels react to unfamiliar terrain, how insects adjust their flight, how small creatures dig into sand for shelter. These early observations build a foundation for later skills. Adults refine this knowledge, turning it into a system that blends instinct with careful study. What seems natural or intuitive to outsiders is actually the result of generations of accumulated experience. The relationship between travelers and animals becomes reciprocal. Humans learn from animals, and animals adapt to human presence. The desert encourages a silent partnership built on respect rather than dependence. Understanding animal behavior means acknowledging that these creatures possess knowledge. Humans cannot replicate knowledge formed not from choice, but from necessity. Animals carry the desert's memory in ways that human senses cannot fully match. Observing animals reveals more than direction. It exposes the desert's deeper patterns. Movement becomes a sign of water. Stillness becomes a sign of danger. Repetition becomes a sign of safe paths. For travelers, reading these signs gradually becomes inseparable from the experience of crossing the Sahara. The land may shift, winds may rise, and stars may hide behind clouds, but animals continue to act according to the truth of their environment. Through the movements of camels, birds, and insects, the desert offers guidance that remains hidden from those who pass without attention. Each track, sound, and instinct becomes part of a quiet pattern that reveals where safety and resources may lie. As this understanding settles into memory, the desert's silence begins to speak in a language shaped entirely by life. Knowledge in the desert does not usually exist in written form. The shifting landscape makes drawn maps unreliable, and the wind erases any marks left on sand. For generations, the people of the Sahara have relied on memory rather than ink, preserving their understanding of routes, landmarks, and dangers through spoken words and songs. These songs become living maps passed quietly from one generation to the next, carrying details that might otherwise be lost in the vastness of the desert. In nomadic communities, storytelling serves as a foundation for all forms of learning. Elders recite long lines of verse at night, their voices steady in the still air. Children listen closely, not merely for entertainment but for survival. Each verse describes a part of the landscape, its dangers, its hidden water sources, and its seasonal changes. The words form a sequence that guides the listener across long distances. Instead of showing direction on a page, the song embeds it in rhythm and narrative, allowing travelers to recall crucial information even when exhausted or disoriented. A verse might describe how dunes shift near a particular valley, or how the wind changes when approaching a dry lake bed. Another might outline a safe route through rocky terrain, or warn against following a deceptive slope. These details appear simple in song, yet they hold the weight of generations of observation. The melodies allow the knowledge to settle in memory without effort. Travelers repeat the verses while walking, letting the cadence align with their steps, transforming the journey into a ritual of remembrance. Folk songs in the Sahara often include descriptions of stars, wind, and plants, merging multiple forms of navigation into a single thread. A line about a bright star rising over a dune marks the time to change direction. A description of the acacia's tilt hints at the presence of seasonal winds. A reference to certain shrubs suggests a nearby water source. These elements blend naturally in the song, creating a guide that does not need to be studied consciously. Instead, it becomes part of daily life, sung during work, travel, or rest. The importance of oral tradition grows stronger in a place where forgetting can be fatal. A single misplaced detail can lead a traveler far off course, so the songs must remain accurate. Elders correct younger singers gently but firmly, ensuring that every word and rhythm remains unchanged. The preservation of each verse becomes an act of responsibility. No line is altered without purpose, and no detail is dismissed as unimportant. Through this careful repetition, knowledge continues through generations with remarkable precision. Some songs serve specific functions. There are long journey songs meant to be sung while walking pace to support endurance across long stretches of sand. There are shorter reminder songs recited at campsites listing nearby landmarks or changes in the terrain. There are warning songs that describe dangerous regions, teaching listeners how to recognize signs that trouble lies ahead. The purpose of each song becomes clear over time, as travelers encounter the landscapes described within the verses. The melodies themselves are simple, designed to be remembered easily and sung repeatedly, without fatigue. Their minimal structure allows them to blend into the surrounding environment. Singing quietly while walking across dunes helps keep focus steady. The voice does not disturb the desert. It blends with the movement of wind across sand. For many travelers, singing becomes a way to maintain rhythm, conserve energy, and remain alert to the environment. Because the songs carry both practical knowledge and emotional weight, they act as bonds within families and communities. Younger travelers feel connected to ancestors through the verses they memorize, understanding that the same melodies guided countless journeys long before their own. The songs become a bridge across time, linking experience with present necessity. This connection provides reassurance during long nights in the desert when silence stretches endlessly and the horizon remains hidden in darkness. As children learn the songs, they also learn discipline. They understand that each verse must be memorized correctly before they can accompany adults on long expeditions. Mastery of the songs marks the transition from childhood to responsibility. When a young traveler recites a verse perfectly during a journey, elders acknowledge that the child has begun to understand the desert, not just through observation, but through inherited knowledge. Oral tradition also adapts to the needs of each generation. While the core structure of the songs remains unchanged, small additions may appear to reflect new routes or shifting dunes. These changes become subtle updates to the living map, ensuring that the knowledge stays relevant. Yet, the essence of the tradition remains constant. Knowledge must be easy to recall, precise in detail, and preserved with respect. Even in modern times, when technology offers new tools for navigation, many desert families continue to pass down the songs. They recognize that electronics can fail, batteries can die, and signals can disappear. The human voice, however, remains steady. Songs cannot be lost while they are remembered, and memory does not depend on machines. This reliability keeps oral tradition alive, even when other aspects of life change. Travelers who embrace these songs find that their journeys become more than physical movement. Each step echoes the past. Each line recalls the observations of countless travelers before them. The desert feels less empty when filled with quiet melodies that hold centuries of knowledge. The songs become companions in a place where solitude dominates, and they transform uncertainty into familiarity. Through steady verses repeated across generations, knowledge survives where written maps fail. Each melody carries fragments of the landscape preserved in rhythm rather than ink. Once these songs take root in memory, the desert's long paths begin to reveal themselves with quiet certainty. Songs in the desert do not behave like ordinary music. They move through the air with a purpose, carrying instructions concealed within their rhythm and direction. For travelers crossing long stretches of sand, a song becomes more than a memory of home or a companion on a quiet night. It becomes a map disguised in melody, a guide that does not fade when winds grow harsh, or when the horizon disappears in a blur of heat. The desert accepts almost nothing permanent, yet it allows songs to linger, passing soundlessly from one traveler to another, as though they belong to the land itself. These songs are structured carefully. Each line leads the listener from one landmark to the next, describing shapes of dunes, the spacing of valleys, and the subtle signs that mark hidden water. The verses unfold like routes drawn across the sky, rather than on paper. Travelers do not think of these songs as instructions. Instead, they think of them as companions that whisper directions at the moments they are needed. A line remembered at the right time can mean the difference between wandering and reaching shelter before nightfall. When sung repeatedly during travel, the rhythm becomes tied to the movement of walking. Steps begin to match the cadence, creating a steady tempo that keeps exhaustion from overwhelming the senses. The body learns the song as deeply as the mind does. With each repetition, the distances described within the verses sink deeper into memory. Valleys, rock formations, and wind-carved ridges become fixed points in an imagined landscape that mirrors the real one. Even when visibility fails, the song remains clear, guiding with the certainty of something long practiced and tested. Some of these songs describe places that no longer exist in the same form. The desert reshapes itself constantly, but the essence of the landmarks remains. A dune may shift, but a particular ridge may retain its hard base. A valley may fill with drifting sand, but the echo mentioned in the song still rings faintly if one listens carefully. Travelers learn to adapt the old verses to new terrains, adjusting their interpretations without altering the rhythm or structure. In this way, the songs endure even as the desert changes. The power of these songs becomes most evident when they are used by those who cannot rely on sight. A traveler who loses vision temporarily from blowing sand or permanently due to illness can still navigate by recalling the sequences described in the melodies. The songs teach direction through sound alone, embedding spatial awareness in rhythm rather than visual cues. Steps counted in time, with the song allow distances to be measured. Turns described in the verses allow orientation to remain steady. A blind traveler who knows the songs well may reach a destination more easily than a sighted one unfamiliar with the terrain. For nomadic families, these songs are taught slowly, often beginning in childhood. Children hear them before they understand their meaning, absorbing melody long before they grasp the weight of the information inside it. Elders do not rush the process. They repeat the songs nightly, letting young listeners become familiar with the flow of the words. In time, children begin to notice how certain melodies accompany particular landscapes or seasons. Their understanding deepens each year until eventually they grasp the full function of the tradition. The act of singing reinforces memory. A map drawn on sand may last only minutes before wind erases it, but a song repeated regularly becomes resistant to loss. Even in moments of fear or exhaustion, melody remains accessible. It brings a sense of calm when a traveler begins to doubt their bearings. The steady rhythm acts like a heartbeat, echoing through the dunes, grounding the mind and re-establishing confidence when uncertainty rises. Songs also tie communities together. Travelers meeting in the desert often recognize versions of the same melodies, though the words may differ slightly based on region or family tradition. This shared musical structure creates a connection even among strangers. A line exchanged between two travelers becomes a form of reassurance, confirming that the knowledge guiding them is widely understood and trusted. The continuity of these melodies across generations forms a subtle thread, linking present journeys with those of ancestors who walked the same routes long before. At night, when the desert quiets and stars emerge, these songs take on a deeper tone. They merge with the stillness, forming pathways that feel almost visible beneath the light of the sky. Travelers who rest beneath the constellations may hum the verses softly, allowing their minds to trace routes through the darkness. The desert holds no written records yet. These quiet melodies preserve information that would otherwise vanish. The sky provides direction above, and the songs provide direction within. Even during the harshest conditions, songs remain reliable. A sandstorm may obscure sight, distort sound, and reshape the land, but the memory of a melody does not falter. Travelers caught in such storms move forward by trusting the rhythm, pulsing in their heads, adjusting their steps based on cues built into the verses. The storm may silence the world around them, yet the internal song remains steady, guiding them until the winds begin to fall. In moments of solitude, when travelers walk long distances alone, the songs become voices that fill the emptiness. They remind the traveler that generations have crossed the same harsh stretches of sand and survived. The melodies represent endurance, adaptability, and the collective memory of a people shaped by the desert's demands. To carry these songs is to carry the wisdom of countless journeys. Through melodies shaped by countless footsteps, the desert's knowledge settles into memory where no wind can reach it. Each verse stretches across dunes and valleys, turning sound into a map that survives from one generation to the next. When these songs begin to guide movement without conscious thought, the desert reveals its hidden roots through rhythm alone. Moonlight in the Sahara carries a different weight from sunlight. It softens the contours of the dunes, stretches shadows into long, silent shapes, and casts a pale glow that feels almost detached from the harshness of the day. When the sky lacks stars, whether because of thin clouds, dust drifting high above, or the simple absence of bright constellations, the moon becomes the next reliable guide. Travelers depend on its position, its tilt, and the shadows it carves into the sand, using these subtle cues to orient themselves through the wide darkness. The moon's movement across the sky mirrors the sun's path, but with gentler transitions. Instead of rising with blinding heat, it appears quietly, often already suspended above the dunes when night settles. Its position still marks direction, though the light it offers is softer. Nomads learn early that the moon's arc can reveal east and west just as the sun does. Watching the moon's ascent and descent helps maintain a sense of direction, even when familiar landmarks fade into the night. The tilt of moonlight on the sand becomes particularly important. When the moon sits at an angle, its light falls across the dunes in distinct slanted lines. Observing these angles allows travelers to detect westward orientation. The sand acts like a canvas, catching the shine in delicate gradients. A long slanted shine stretching across the crest of a dune may signal that the moon is leaning toward the west. Travelers study these patterns with patience, knowing that even a slight change in tilt can help correct their path. Shadows also provide direction. A traveler standing alone in the desert at night sees their shadow stretch away from the moon in a clean, elongated line. The direction of this shadow becomes a simple orientation tool. Turning slowly, the traveler watches how the shadow rotates, aligning itself carefully with a chosen path. Even faint moonlight can cast clear enough shadows to make this method reliable. The key is not brightness but consistency. The moon's slow, steady glow allows shadows to remain stable long enough for orientation. During moonlit nights, the dunes reveal textures invisible during the day. Their curves glow faintly, their ridges become soft waves of silver, and their slopes appear more symmetrical. This clarity helps travelers distinguish between new dunes formed by recent winds and older dunes with familiar shapes. Often, the moonlight reveals details that sunlight hides in harsh brightness. Subtle depressions, small stones, or dry channels near the base of a dune become easier to identify, offering additional cues to the traveler's location. When stars vanish behind clouds or wind-blown dust, travelers turn fully to the moon. Its reliability lies not only in direction, but in rhythm. The phases of the moon provide information about the time of month, helping travelers anticipate seasonal winds or temperature changes. A half moon sitting low on the horizon may signal late-night hours. A fuller moon high above may indicate early night. These small temporal markers allow travelers to measure distance and pace without counting steps. Moonlight also influences the behavior of the desert itself. Animals move differently under its glow, casting shadows that reveal their paths. Camels appear more alert, insects more active, and the shapes of birds gliding low across the sand become faint silhouettes. Observing these behaviors supplements navigation, offering clues about nearby water or shifting winds. Moonlight in this sense becomes not only a direct guide, but a lens through which the desert's patterns become easier to interpret. When clouds obscure, the moon travelers wait, knowing that even a brief clearing can provide enough light to regain orientation. Unlike stars, which may require extended visibility to interpret the moon, reveals direction quickly once its glow appears. A sudden parting in the clouds, sending a narrow beam across the dunes, allows travelers to reposition themselves before darkness returns. This fleeting clarity becomes invaluable during long, uncertain nights. Some travelers describe moonlit nights as quieter than starlit ones. The wind seems to ease, the sand shifts less aggressively, and the dunes appear still. The moon's glow softens the desert's edges, reducing the sense of isolation. Under this gentle light, travelers feel less pressure from the vastness around them. The sky does not command attention the way a field of stars does. Instead, it offers a single, consistent point of reference, encouraging steady observation rather than constant searching. The moon becomes even more essential when navigating without stars. On some nights, the sky appears washed out, the stars hidden behind thin layers of airborne dust. In these conditions, the moon becomes the primary anchor. Travelers align themselves with its tilt, measure their shadows, and follow the illuminated ridges of dunes. This approach may seem delicate, but in the Sahara, subtlety often proves more reliable than forceful certainty. The desert rewards those who read small signs. Even in near darkness, the moon's glow provides enough contrast to reveal the boundary between dune and sky. Travelers use this outline to orient themselves, ensuring they move toward rising or falling land rather than losing altitude unknowingly. The silhouette of the horizon, softened by moonlight, becomes a gentle guide that directs movement across the desert's uneven terrain. Moonlight also interacts with memory. Travelers often recall the appearance of dunes under certain lunar phases, matching their current surroundings with remembered shapes. A crescent moon may highlight narrow ridges, while a fuller moon reveals broader slopes. These faint differences become part of an internal map built through many nights of walking under the same sky. Over time, the moon becomes not only a guiding light, but part of the desert's identity. When travelers reach camp after a night guided by the moon, they often speak of how different the land feels under its glow. Walking by moonlight becomes less of a challenge and more of a quiet ritual, an acceptance of the desert's slower pace, its muted colors, and its subtle signals. The moon stands above it all, steady and calm, offering direction, with a kind of gentle certainty that contrasts sharply with the desert's shifting ground. Through its steady glow, the moon offers direction when the night hides every other guide. Each slanted beam, or stretching shadow, becomes a quiet signal across the dunes. Once these patterns settle into instinct, even moonlit silence turns into a path waiting to be read. Heat in the Sahara does not behave uniformly. It moves across the desert in layers carried by wind stored in sand and released gradually long after the sun disappears. For travelers who must navigate without visible landmarks or tools, this shifting heat becomes another form of guidance. The warmth of the air, the temperature of the ground beneath their feet, and the subtle transitions between hot and cool surfaces reveal orientation in ways that might seem impossible to those unfamiliar with the desert's language. During the summer months, the wind arriving from the south carries a deeper, more intense heat. It pushes across the dunes with a slow heaviness, distinct from the sharper winds of other seasons. Desert travelers recognize this southern heat immediately. It dries the mouth faster, presses against the skin with steady force, and moves as if weighted by the distant regions it passes through. Feeling this particular warmth allows travelers to estimate direction, even when the landscape around them dissolves into sun glare and haze. They know that stepping into the wind means walking south while letting it press against their backs sends them northward. This southern heat becomes especially useful when dunes reshape themselves under strong winds. When visual cues disappear, the temperature of the air becomes the only remaining orientation. Travelers pause, lift their faces slightly, and sense where the warmest current originates. The desert's silence enhances this perception. Without trees or buildings to break the movement of air, each gust arrives with clarity, carrying precise information about direction and season. While the wind provides immediate clues, the sand holds its own form of memory. Sand in the Sahara absorbs sunlight with remarkable efficiency, storing heat during the day and releasing it slowly through the evening. Yet not all sand cools at the same rate. On the western sides of dunes, where the sun lingers longest before setting, the heat remains trapped much later than on the eastern sides. By walking across the dunes and feeling how the temperature changes beneath their feet, travelers learn to distinguish direction based on these variations. The difference can be subtle. A slope warmed only briefly might cool quickly, becoming comfortable to step on as evening grows deeper. But a western-facing slope retains its warmth, radiating it upward in slow pulses. This lingering heat becomes a beacon. Travelers feel it through their sandals or when conditions allow directly through the soles of their feet. The body learns to interpret these sensations, turning them into small but reliable markers. In some stretches of the desert, the contrast between warm and cool sand becomes the only guide available. During twilight hours, when shadows lengthen and the horizon blurs, the heat stored in the sand helps confirm orientation. A traveler who steps onto a surprisingly warm patch knows they are likely moving westward. One who feels cooler grains beneath their feet may be drifting toward the east. Over time, this method becomes instinctive, requiring no conscious calculation, only a willingness to listen to the land through the body's most basic senses. Wind and sand interact constantly. As the sun sets, the air cools more quickly than the ground, creating small pockets of rising heat. Travelers sense these pockets while walking, using them to anticipate the shape of the terrain ahead. A sudden burst of warm air may signal a dune crest still retaining sunlight. A gradual cooling may indicate a valley or sheltered area. These gentle temperature gradients form a kind of thermal map across the desert floor. Walking barefoot on cooler nights becomes a deliberate act of navigation. The skin on the feet grows sensitive after years of travel, capable of noting even slight differences in texture and warmth. Experienced nomads describe how the desert speaks most clearly through the ground, and they rely on this contact to confirm direction when winds grow unpredictable. Feeling the sand allows them to judge how recently the sun touched a particular slope, how deeply the heat penetrated, and whether they remain aligned with the intended path. Travelers also pay attention to how quickly the sand cools after sunset. Rapid cooling may suggest regions where the dunes are lower or where the sand composition differs. Slow cooling may imply a more open area, exposed to strong sunlight during the day. Matching these sensations with experience helps create orientation, even when the sky provides no guidance. During extreme heat, the desert becomes more transparent in its behavior. The sound of wind changes slightly, gaining a hollow resonance as it moves across overheated surfaces. The air near the ground shimmers, distorting distances and shapes. Experienced travelers understand these distortions, reading them as signs rather than obstacles. They recognize which illusions are harmless and which signal dangerous heat rising from the ground. In certain seasons, heat arriving from the south combines with the lingering warmth of western dunes, creating a layered sensation that points towards specific times of year. Travelers use these seasonal heat signatures to anticipate shifts in wind patterns or the possibility of rare storms. Understanding heat becomes not only a means of navigation, but a way of predicting the desert's mood long before it reveals itself fully. Children learn these skills gradually. Elders encourage them to walk barefoot at dusk and dawn, teaching them how the ground's temperature changes with the sun's movement. They learn to identify the southern heat of summer and distinguish it from the lighter warmth of other winds. These early lessons shape their confidence, allowing them to trust their senses in a place where almost nothing remains fixed. Travelers who rely on heat for navigation do so with quiet attentiveness. They know the desert does not shout its instructions. It offers them gently through warmth on the skin and pressure in the air. To interpret these signals, they must slow their pace, breathe evenly, and allow their senses to adjust. The desert rewards stillness and punishes haste. Through shifting layers of warm air and cooling sand, the desert reveals the orientation hidden beneath its silence. Each rise in temperature and lingering patch of heat becomes a subtle marker across an uncertain landscape. Gradually, this awareness settles into the traveler's mind until the desert's warmth guides every step with quiet precision. He walked across the wide stretch of sand with the same steady pace he had kept since dawn, and the landscape appeared as empty as it had the day before. Nothing moved around him, and nothing pointed the way, except for faint disruptions on the surface that most people would overlook. He had been taught to look for marks that did not belong to the natural curve of a dune or the usual scattering of wind-shaped grains, and with time, those marks became the closest thing to guidance in a place that rarely offered any. To him, the desert never looked featureless, because every quiet sign left by someone long before still carried a direction inside it. Far ahead, he noticed a small arrangement of stones, placed in a way that did not feel accidental. The stones were darkened by heat and dust, but their formation held an intention that the natural environment could not imitate. Caravan groups often left such arrangements to signal turns, resting points, or warnings that only made sense to those familiar with the pattern. He recognized the slight tilt of the topmost stone, and he remembered hearing elders explain that such a tilt meant the path curved toward lower terrain. These memories surfaced slowly without urgency, as if each detail waited for the traveler to discover it again. He passed the stones and saw in the sand beyond them a soft indentation stretching into the distance. The wind had partially covered it, and the edges were smooth, but the direction of the faint line was still clear under the early light. Old caravan trails could survive this way, half erased but not gone, and those who understood how to read them could follow paths that had existed for generations. He knew that such trails often marked the safest routes between distant wells, and though they shifted over seasons, their core structure remained reliable. He studied the width of the mark and the shallow curve of its path, allowing himself to settle into the quiet sense of direction it offered. A short distance later, something darker broke the flat brightness of the sand. The frame of a weathered wooden post leaned slightly, as if it had been placed there long ago and forgotten. The desert devoured wood slowly, letting it stand for many years before it collapsed. And for travelers in this region, the presence of a wooden post usually meant proximity to an old resting shelter or a fenced area used by past caravans. He approached and saw shallow holes in the ground, where other posts must have once stood. They were barely visible now, but they helped confirm that many people had passed here, and that their presence had shaped a route still traceable in the present. He moved further and found small fragments of pottery half buried in the sand. These fragments had once belonged to water containers carried by travelers, forced to lighten their loads during long crossings. Their breakage marked exhaustion, desperation, or simply the end of a routine journey where damaged items were left behind. He picked up one fragment, turned it gently to observe the worn surface, then placed it back exactly where it had rested. In the desert, even objects without value held meaning, because they anchored stories of movement across a landscape that rarely changed. Later, as the sun rose higher, he saw what many would consider an unsettling sight. The sun caught the curve of a bone bleached nearly white lying beside sand that had pressed hard against it. As he walked closer, the full form of a camel's skeleton took shape. Caravans depended on camels, and their remains often marked old routes, places where water had been misjudged or where storms had separated animals from their groups. To a traveler familiar with desert knowledge, such remains indicated that the direction ahead likely continued toward a known watering point, because camels rarely wandered far before collapsing. Though the sight carried a quiet heaviness, it also confirmed he was walking along a route shaped by the passage of others. In the afternoon, shadows grew sharper and revealed older marks he could not see earlier. A faint square depression hinted at the base of a structure. This might once have been a small shelter, a lookout, or a simple storage space where laborers had rested in past decades. Only the outline remained, yet names stored in oral tradition described such structures as signs that a well or shade area was near. He paused there, letting the stillness settle before he continued forward. His attention moved from one detail to the next, each fragment forming part of a quiet map built from memory and observation. He understood that desert travelers survived not through instinct alone, but through patient study of everything others left behind. The marks were not many, and they were not obvious, but they pointed towards safety and continuation in a place where carelessness could erase a life as easily as the wind erased footprints. He followed the soft curve of the old track until the horizon shifted slightly, revealing lower land and a faint dark patch that might belong to vegetation. Every step felt guided by the accumulated presence of those who had walked the same route long before him. He accepted that this was how desert navigation worked, not through certainty, but through trust in the small signs that endured despite the sand. Subtle traces of past travelers remain etched into the desert, offering direction where none seems visible. Each stone track and remnant adds another quiet layer to the landscape's hidden guidance. Over time, these signs form a path that reveals its meaning only to those who move with patience. He watched the desert the way someone studies a wall for cracks, quiet and steady, letting the smallest irregular marks settle into memory. Nothing about the open sand seemed meaningful at first glance, yet people who walked this place for generations had turned every uneven line into a clue. A shifted stone, a leaning branch, or a half-buried stick was never an accident here. Travelers learned to look for what others might dismiss as debris, because in this landscape the smallest detail could separate survival from disappearance. He moved at a calm pace, eyes drifting low and wide, letting the ground speak in its plain and unadorned language. A group passing through the desert in earlier seasons could not rely on ink or tools, so they marked their movement through the simplest physical traces. A rock placed at a slight angle meant someone had paused there before continuing. A branch stuck into the sand indicated a direction chosen with intention. These clues lasted longer than footprints, resisting wind and time, better than fabric, leather, or bones. They belonged to no one, yet anyone who understood the code could use them as guidance across long distances. No message was written yet, meaning persisted. Wind erased obvious paths within minutes, but it had a harder time erasing objects with weight. A traveler might recognize a cluster of stones arranged in a pattern that only people of the region used. A single branch angled in a specific direction could point toward a well, a resting area, or a safe rise of ground where a tent might once have stood. He had seen many such markers over the years, each carrying the quiet intelligence of people who adapted to scarcity rather than fought against it. Their signals were plain, almost blunt, but that bluntness was the core of their strength. There was nothing decorative in these marks. Everything served a simple purpose: direction. A stone leaning left might indicate a turn taken by a group avoiding uncertain weather. A thicker branch inserted upright into the sand could indicate a stable path ahead. Even the absence of markers carried meaning. When nothing appeared in expected places, it signaled danger, collapse, or a region once abandoned for reasons not spoken aloud. In this environment, silence was also a map. He observed the land slowly, because speed only caused the eyes to miss what mattered. A long flat stone placed at a diagonal might represent a warning to shift course slightly east. A short stick pressed deep into the sand could be a signal of a temporary landmark, something that held significance earlier but might no longer be reliable. Travelers did not need precision. They needed cues that pointed towards safety. These were enough. The practice required discipline, something he learned over the years of movement. People new to the desert looked too far ahead, searching for signs on the horizon. People who belonged to the desert looked down close to their feet, knowing the ground held the most dependable record. Stones did not lie. Branches did not exaggerate. Each remained exactly where someone had placed it, unless wind or time decided otherwise. And even then, he could tell when something had shifted in a way that suggested a human hand rather than natural erosion. He remembered watching an elder interpret a path made entirely of such markers. The elder barely paused, eyes moving from object to object with a calm ease shaped by decades. A jagged rock pointing slightly toward the north meant the group they were tracking had expected wind from the west. A thin stick leaning south signaled a correction made after a brief misjudgment. The elder read these signs with the same familiarity others would use to read letters written on a page. There was nothing mystical in it. It was repetition, attention, and the quiet understanding that information often hides in plain sight. Walking through the desert meant accepting that nothing stayed permanent. Stones buried today could reappear next season. Branches placed with intention might scatter after storms. The system was not perfect, but perfection was not needed. These markers were meant to guide, not command. They offered a direction, a suggestion, a memory of someone else's decision left behind for those who came later. He understood then that the desert rarely gave answers. It offered hints, and people learned to listen. He noticed a single angled branch ahead of him. It was thin, dry, and placed purposefully into the sand. Its direction pointed to a ridge, where the ground rose at a safe incline. Someone before him had made a choice, and now he stood before the remnant of that choice. He did not rush. He let the information settle the way he always did. The branch said nothing, but it carried intent. That was enough. He turned, slightly adjusting his path, not because he trusted the marker blindly, but because he respected the logic behind it. People who crossed these plains left signs only when necessary. They did not waste effort. If someone had placed a branch here, there was a reason. He kept walking, allowing the ground, the objects, and the silence to direct him. Each small detail lining up in his thoughts until the direction ahead felt steady and true. Even the plainest object can hold meaning in a place where nothing is wasted. Every marker becomes a quiet reminder that survival depends on noticing what others might overlook. Somewhere beyond the next stretch of sand, Another sign waits for the traveler who knows how to see it. In the desert, smell becomes one of the first senses that begins to matter even before shapes or shadows appear on the horizon. The air carries its own set of signals, and anyone moving through this landscape learns that scent can reveal more than sight. A change in odor can indicate dryness, water movement, or danger, and those who cross the sands understand that these quiet messages deserve attention. The desert does not speak loudly. It communicates through faint traces that drift across the surface of the wind. By keeping the breath steady and the pace even, the traveler allows the air to settle long enough to read its meaning. Wind coming from the direction of the water has a weight that sets it apart. Moisture alters the air in a way that is subtle but unmistakable to anyone who has lived long enough with these conditions. The scent is neither sweet nor refreshing. It simply carries a faint heaviness that does not belong to dry sand. Even the smallest hint can signal that wells, shaded hollows, or abandoned resting points may lie ahead. This awareness becomes part of the traveler's movement, guiding each decision with a calm certainty. Dry wind behaves differently. It moves sharply and touches the face with a roughness that leaves no confusion about its origin. Sand heated by the sun produces a faint burned odor, thin and brittle, reaching the nose with a kind of dryness that feels abrasive. People unfamiliar with the desert often find it unpleasant, but those who depend on it for direction learn to recognize degrees within the dryness. A mild version suggests stable plains. A deeper, harsher dryness can warn of shifting sand or long stretches without shelter. These are not dramatic announcements. They are simply signals forming a steady flow of information. Dust carried by the wind adds further clues. When the air brings a dusty scent with traces of clay or old root fragments, it suggests that rain once shaped the land or that vegetation may be nearby. Areas touched by old storms often retain faint odors long after their shapes have faded. For the traveler, this means insects, plant life, or places where animals have passed. These details accumulate quietly, joining a larger memory of roots and features that cannot be recorded on parchment. People living in the desert learn to detect changes in humidity with remarkable precision. A slight increase in moisture can hint at an oasis or underground water. A sudden drop warns of rising winds or harsher conditions ahead. After surviving many storms, the traveler recognizes the importance of these shifts. A rapid loss of moisture often signals a difficult afternoon, while a slow gain can mean heavier air later in the day. None of this is emotional. It is simply a steady recognition of how the environment behaves. The scent of camels is another marker that persists longer than footprints. The odor is warm, earthy, and distinct enough to be recognized even when carried lightly on the wind. A faint trace usually means that a resting site or abandoned camp is near. Because sand removes tracks quickly, this scent becomes a more reliable indicator of recent human presence. If the odor is strong, travelers may be close. If it is fading, the stop may still hold shelter or information. In a place where distance erases signs with ease, smell becomes a dependable source of direction. Those raised in the desert trust their nose as much as their sight. Bright sun hides distant shapes, and dust obscures entire horizons, but scent remains close to the body. Learning to pause, breathe slowly, and let the air settle becomes part of safe travel. Rushing confuses the senses. Patience clarifies them. Over time, odor becomes a map without lines or symbols, a guide formed entirely through quiet observation. During long crossings, the traveler pauses at intervals, not to rest, but to evaluate what the air brings. The mixture of warmth, dust, and faint organic traces shifts throughout the day. Breathing carefully reveals these changes. These skills cannot be learned through formal instruction. They come from repetition and from living close to the ground. The desert changes constantly, and awareness must change with it. Smell fills the gaps left by unreliable shadows and hidden landmarks. A light trace of moisture enters the air from the east. It is barely noticeable, yet enough for the traveler to adjust direction. No urgency accompanies the decision. The desert offers no guarantees and makes no promises. It simply provides clues. Understanding them requires stillness, endurance, and attention. Smell becomes memory, and memory becomes orientation. Through these small shifts, movement across vast distances becomes possible. Smell becomes a companion in places where the land offers little else to guide the senses. Each variation in the wind carries a piece of information waiting to be recognized. Far ahead, the air will change again, leaving the traveler to decide what path it quietly suggests. Morning and evening become the most reliable moments for anyone trying to understand direction in the desert, because the sun behaves with a consistency that the land itself does not offer. Countless dunes shift under the pressure of wind, leaving no stable markers, yet the movement of the sun remains steady. Its rise in the east and its descent in the west provide a structure that travelers depend on. This knowledge seems simple, but in a place where horizons stretch endlessly, applying it requires patience and repeated practice. At dawn, the light comes in slowly, spreading across the sand with a pale clarity. Shapes begin to form, and shadows appear long before the heat arrives. By observing where the first line of brightness touches the edge of the desert, travelers determine the eastern direction. This moment is brief. The sun rises quickly, and once it gains height, shadows shorten and clarity fades. Anyone who depends on this method must wake early enough to catch the exact alignment before it disappears. The horizon in the desert can be deceptive. The absence of trees, buildings, or noticeable structures makes it difficult to judge the sun's exact point of rise. Sometimes a dune formation blocks part of the view. Sometimes heat distortions blur the line between sand and sky. Because of this experience, travelers position themselves on higher ground during dawn. Even a slight elevation provides a clearer perspective, ensuring that the angle of light is interpreted correctly. Those who do not take this step often find themselves misjudging direction within minutes. Evening offers another chance to gain reliable information. The sun sets with a steady decline, drawing long shadows across the dunes. These shadows extend towards the east, creating lines that can be followed for a short time. Unlike dawn, the air cools during sunset, and the light changes gradually. This allows more time for observation. Travelers often use this period to confirm the direction they have been moving throughout the day. If their shadow alignment matches the expected orientation, they know they have maintained a stable course. Shadows in the desert behave differently depending on the terrain. On flat surfaces, they form clear paths stretching in predictable lines. On uneven dunes, they bend slightly, influenced by slopes and curves. Reading these differences requires familiarity with the landscape. A traveler who understands this avoids mistaking a shifted shadow for a directional error. Instead, they adjust their interpretation to the slope beneath their feet. This forms part of the training that desert people pass down through generations. Distance estimation becomes possible by tracking the length of shadows throughout the evening. As the sun lowers, shadows grow longer. Observing how quickly they extend provides clues about how far the traveler has moved since midday. This is not precise in a mathematical sense, but it forms a steady internal rhythm. People begin to associate certain shadow lengths with their progress across the land. The desert offers no milestones, so these visual markers become valuable. At both dawn and dusk, travelers stop briefly to let their eyes adjust to the light. Morning light can be sharp and cold, while evening light carries a softer tone. The shift between these states helps the observer sense whether the sun has moved enough to indicate a new reading. In the middle of the day, when the sun stands high, shadows disappear almost entirely, making navigation difficult. Because of this, dawn and dusk become essential moments, and missing them can complicate the journey. The desert's wide horizon means the sun appears larger and more distant than in other landscapes. This makes some travelers hesitant at first, unsure of whether they are interpreting the direction correctly. Over time, repeated exposure brings confidence. People learn to trust the movement of the sun, even when the land around them feels disorienting. This trust is not based on instinct, but on observation that has been tested across generations. At dusk, the sky shifts in layers of color, and each layer provides subtle clues. The brightest line near the setting sun aligns consistently with the west. Slightly above it, the fading tone helps confirm direction once the sun has dipped below the horizon. Skilled travelers read these changes to continue orienting themselves even after the sun can no longer be seen. For a short window, the sky retains enough structure to serve as a guide. These techniques are not used in isolation. Travelers combine them with other signs such as wind, temperature, and terrain shape. Still, sunrise and sunset act as anchors, grounding all other interpretations. Without them, the desert becomes far more difficult to read. Their reliability forms a foundation that supports every other skill required for survival. During long crossings, people often time their movements so they can take advantage of dusk and dawn. Some begin traveling before sunrise, pausing once the sun becomes too high. Others move through the late afternoon, relying on the steady lengthening of shadows. These choices depend on experience and on the conditions of the season. Regardless of the variation, the importance of these two daily moments remains unchanged. Sunlight at the edges of the day becomes a steady guide that offers clarity the open landscape cannot. Shadows mark direction and distance with a simplicity earned through repeated practice. Another technique waits ahead, shaped by the quiet rhythm of breath and steps across shifting sand. Movement across the desert is measured not by landmarks, but by the rhythm of the body. With no fixed structures to rely on, travelers turn inward, using steps and breathing as steady indicators of distance. This method appears simple, yet it demands concentration that must be maintained for hours at a time. Sand shifts, wind rises, and the sun alters the landscape, but the body's rhythm remains consistent enough to build a form of internal record. The desert rewards this discipline by revealing distance through repetition rather than through sight. Counting steps in silence becomes a central habit for nomads. Each stride forms part of a sequence that stretches through the day, creating a mental track of progress. The numbers do not need to be spoken or memorized as complex figures. The traveler stores them quietly, letting the count accumulate until a familiar total is reached. These totals correspond to segments of land known through experience. After years of travel, individuals recognize how far 1,000 steps feel under different temperatures, winds, and sand densities. This awareness grows into an instinctive sense of how much ground has been covered. The terrain changes the nature of each step. Moving uphill shortens the count because fatigue slows the pace. Moving downhill lengthens it, creating an effortless speed that can distort judgment for those who have not learned to adjust. Flat stretches allow for the most accurate measurements. Those raised in the desert understand these variations and correct for them naturally. They do not allow the terrain to mislead them. They adapt their calculations with a steady, practiced calm. Breathing provides a second measure of distance. Each stretch of land corresponds not just to several steps, but also to a certain number of breaths. Travelers inhale and exhale at a consistent rate when moving at a set pace. By maintaining this rhythm, they learn to associate specific breathing cycles with familiar distances. A certain number of breaths may equal the space between two grazing regions. A longer cycle may represent the distance between wells. This method offers a dependable internal guide even when wind disrupts visibility or erases footprints. Breathing as a measurement requires discipline. Heat exhaustion and thirst disrupt the rhythm. When this happens, the traveler slows down rather than speeds up, allowing the breathing pattern to return to normal. Only after regaining consistency do they resume counting. Reliance on this method does not come from urgency but from the understanding that steady patterns are more reliable than hurried estimates. Those who abandon the rhythm often lose their sense of distance and must stop entirely to recover it. Songs provide a third layer of orientation, not for pleasure, but for structure. Simple melodies with steady pacing allow travelers to track their speed without breaking concentration. The rhythm acts like a metronome, guiding the steps and breathing into alignment. These songs pass from elders to younger members of the group, each one designed to match a particular pace. Some are used for long journeys, others for shorter routes between grazing areas. The melody keeps the traveler grounded, even when the wind grows loud or the sun overwhelms the senses. Using a song also prevents the mind from drifting. The desert's monotony can cause attention to wander, leading travelers to lose track of step counts or breathing cycles. A steady tune keeps the mind anchored, ensuring that movement remains consistent. When the tune ends, the traveler knows exactly how much distance has been covered, because each song has a known duration and an associated step count. This transforms a simple melody into a navigational tool. During the hottest hours, people often move more slowly, adjusting both step count and breath cycle to match the conditions. Even when the pace changes, the method remains reliable because the traveler measures distance according to the adjusted rhythm. The desert does not demand speed, it demands accuracy. By moving with the environment instead of against it, travelers preserve energy while maintaining precise awareness of their progress. In the evening, when the temperature drops, the rhythm shifts again. Steps become firmer as the sand cools and breathing becomes more comfortable. Travelers take advantage of this period to cover longer distances, knowing they can maintain stable counts. The body becomes an instrument through which the land can be read. Numbers and breaths hold the meaning that landmarks fail to provide. This internal system grows stronger with age. Older nomads carry decades of measurements within them, allowing them to estimate distances with a level of accuracy that surprises outsiders. Their bodies store the memory of routes, seasons, and habitual paces. Younger travelers learn by following them, matching their breathing, counting with them, and repeating the songs that have guided movement for generations. Through this internal mapping, the desert becomes manageable. Distance stops being an unknown stretch and turns into a sequence of familiar rhythms. It is not the land that reveals how far one has gone, but the steady repetition of steps and breaths that make the vast space understandable. Distance becomes measurable through the quiet rhythm of movement, rather than through visible signs. Steps, breaths, and steady melodies give structure to a landscape that offers none on its own. Ahead lies another method shaped by shifting light and the reflective surface of the sand. A body moving through the desert becomes its own instrument for orientation, even when the land offers no clear sign of direction. The absence of markers forces attention inward toward the steady rhythm that remains under the traveler's control. Footsteps fall, one after another, breath rises and falls, and this pattern forms a personal guide that no wind, storm, or shifting dune can remove. In a landscape where everything external can change without warning, the body's movement remains a constant that people rely on for survival. Nothing in the desert can take away this living compass. Wind may erase footprints within seconds, and sand may reshape itself into new forms by the time daylight returns, but the sense of movement within the traveler stays intact. Each person carries this orientation system without needing tools or equipment. It does not wear down, break, or disappear. As long as the body can move, this internal compass stays active. It becomes a stable point in an environment where stability rarely exists. The importance of this internal guide grows clearer with experience. New travelers sometimes focus too much on distant shapes or horizons that shift under heat distortions. Their attention drifts outward toward things that cannot be trusted. Seasoned travelers, however, keep their awareness centered on the rhythm of their steps and breathing. They know that the desert draws the eye into illusions, but the body does not mislead in the same way. By relying on their own physical consistency, they avoid following deceptive shapes or wandering into dangerous terrain. Each footstep contributes to an ongoing mental record, creating a series of signals that form a map inside the mind. These signals accumulate over hours and days. A certain number of steps may correspond to a known distance from one grazing spot to another. A longer sequence may match the route between two seasonal camps. These measurements are not written or spoken. They exist as quiet impressions stored through repetition. Through this, the traveler learns to navigate without ever needing to look back at where they started. Over time, this mental map becomes reliable enough that even unfamiliar areas begin to feel structured. The mind recognizes patterns in movement, in terrain density, and in the slight changes in breathing that occur when climbing or descending. These patterns build a sense of continuity across the journey. Even when the sand looks unfamiliar, the internal signals remain steady, allowing the traveler to maintain direction with confidence. Breath works alongside footsteps to reinforce this mapping. The rise and fall of the chest becomes a slow, consistent measure of distance and pace. People who live in the desert learn to maintain steady breathing, even in harsh heat, ensuring that their internal rhythm remains unbroken. When breath becomes irregular due to exhaustion or dehydration, travelers pause to recover it. A broken breathing pattern means a broken sense of orientation, so maintaining it becomes a priority. Once the rhythm returns, the journey resumes. With both footsteps and breathing aligned, the traveler begins to sense the invisible path ahead. This path is not marked by signs or physical boundaries. It exists only through continuity of movement. The more consistently a person walks, the more clearly they sense slight shifts in direction. Turning too sharply disrupts the rhythm. Drifting too far off course creates tension in steps or breathing. These subtle signals help the traveler correct their route long before the mistake becomes obvious through external cues. People raised in the desert refine this awareness from an early age. Children who follow their elders learn to match their pace and breathing, forming the foundation for their own internal compass. As they grow older, their personal rhythm becomes more stable, turning into a dependable guide. By adulthood, many can sense when they are drifting off course, simply because their steps no longer align with the expected sequence stored in memory. In long journeys, the internal map becomes even more important. Exhaustion, heat, and shifting terrain weaken visual cues. Days pass without encountering any feature that stands out. Under these conditions, travelers rely almost entirely on their living compass. They do not hurry because speed disrupts the rhythm. They do not stop unnecessarily because too many pauses break the flow. They walk steadily, trusting the sequence that forms in their minds. This sense of orientation never disappears, even when travelers rest at night or wait out a storm. The memory of their movement remains intact. When they begin again, the body quickly returns to its established rhythm. The desert may be unpredictable, but the compass within it resets, with each new step resuming its function without hesitation. The path ahead reveals itself gradually as the traveler continues forward. Confidence grows not from seeing the destination, but from trusting the consistency of movement. The invisible map takes shape through repetition, turning vast empty land into a manageable progression. The body becomes a guide that needs no markers, no sun, and no tools. Movement forms the only dependable measurement in a place where the land offers none. Each step and breath strengthens the quiet structure that guides the traveler forward. Further ahead, another method emerges, shaped by the shifting brightness of the sand itself. Light becomes one of the most dependable signals in the desert, especially when the land shows no markers, and the wind has erased all traces of earlier travelers. The surface of the sand reacts to sunlight with a clarity that allows experienced people to read direction without tools. This method depends entirely on careful observation, repetition, and a familiarity with how brightness behaves at different times of day. Even when dunes shift or storms pass, the relationship between sunlight and sand remains consistent enough to serve as a guide. During morning hours, the desert reflects light more intensely than at any other time. The sun rises at a low angle, striking the sand with a sharp brightness that spreads quickly across the surface. This reflection becomes strongest when facing east, where the sun first appears. The brightness is not only visual, it carries a physical sensation. Travelers feel the glare on their eyes and skin before the heat fully settles. By facing the direction with the strongest morning reflection, they identify the eastern horizon with confidence. This method becomes especially useful when the sky is clear and the ground stretches in all directions without interruption. As the sun rises higher, the intensity of the reflection changes. The brightness becomes less directional and more evenly distributed, making navigation harder at midday. Because of this, morning becomes the best time to read the desert through light alone. Travelers who depend on this method start early, taking advantage of the period before shadows shorten and brightness spreads too broadly to hold clear meaning. Those unfamiliar with the desert often mistake this morning glare for simple discomfort, but for experienced nomads, it is a structured signal that reveals where the day begins. Brightness also shifts according to the sun's position, in a way that creates a pattern over the course of the day. When facing west in the morning, the sand appears softer and less reflective. When facing east, it becomes sharper and more intense. This contrast helps maintain direction, even when the sun is not directly visible due to dust, haze, or partial cloud cover. Travelers learn to compare the brightness in different directions with calm attention, identifying the direction of the sun by noticing which part of the land reflects more strongly. Over time, this becomes instinctive, forming another internal reference for movement. Light changes again in late afternoon. The glare from the east fades, and the western side of the land begins to show stronger reflection as the sun descends. This pattern mirrors the morning, but in reverse. By observing these shifts, travelers confirm both the passage of time and the orientation of their path. The desert provides this information without variation, as long as light reaches the ground. Even weak sunlight contains enough direction to guide movement if the traveler knows how to interpret its angle and intensity. Some travelers refine this skill by studying how different sand textures react to sunlight. Finer grains create a smoother, more uniform reflection, while coarser sand produces a more broken texture. When facing the sun's general direction, the smoother surface often appears brighter. The slight differences between textures become noticeable only after long experience, yet they contribute to more accurate navigation. People who spend their lives in the desert learn to read these details without conscious effort. In addition to sand, certain minerals scattered across the desert surface offer another clue. Some stones contain metallic elements that catch the sun with a distinct gleam. These stones reflect light strongly when the sun strikes them from the east. Their brief flashes of brightness can help identify direction when the sand's reflection is too uniform to interpret. These mineral patches are not large, but they stand out enough to be useful when passing near them. Travelers memorize their distribution in some regions, knowing that their presence is more common on the eastern side of certain routes. Even without minerals, the color of the land shifts slightly depending on the angle of the sun. Facing east in the morning, the sand often appears paler. Facing west, it takes on a deeper tone. These subtle changes provide another reliable reference. People who cross the desert often do not think about why these patterns occur. They simply recognize them as part of the terrain's behavior. Their bodies respond naturally, adjusting direction based on the quality of the light rather than on any visible landmark. When storms clear and the land is freshly shaped, the reflective surface becomes even more responsive to sunlight. The smoothness created by the recent wind allows brightness to travel farther. Travelers take advantage of this reading direction from greater distances than usual. But they also move carefully, knowing that the lack of texture can cause the land to appear identical in every direction. In such cases, dependence on brightness must be exact because mistakes are harder to detect. Although light-based navigation seems simple, it demands steady observation from morning to evening. The desert changes rapidly throughout the day, and only those who maintain awareness avoid losing orientation. Travelers who rely on this method do not hurry. They pause often to reassess brightness, adjusting their direction with quiet precision. Over time, sunlight becomes as readable as any map, and the desert's open space no longer feels directionless. Brightness becomes a stable guide in a landscape lacking fixed points. Reflections shift in predictable patterns, allowing direction to be read through calm observation. Ahead lies another form of guidance shaped by memory, tradition, and the paths held by older generations. Across the desert, movement is not random. Each group follows paths that have been shaped over generations, forming routes that continue long after their origins have faded from memory. These routes exist because they have proven reliable through droughts, storms, and shifting terrain. People repeat them because repetition keeps them safe. Even when the land changes shape, the structure of these routes remains deeply embedded in the collective habits of each community. They are not written, marked, or displayed, but they form a steady network of motion across an environment that allows no permanent trace. Every tribe carries its own route, a path understood from childhood, practiced through seasonal migration, and reinforced through shared experience. These pathways differ from one group to another because each community has learned its own set of safe passages, water points, and resting areas. A person born into a tribe does not question these routes. They inherit them in the same way they inherit stories, customs, and daily responsibilities. Over time, the path becomes a natural extension of life, providing continuity, no matter how unstable the surrounding landscape may appear. The elders serve as the living memory of these routes. They are the ones who have traveled across seasons long enough to witness rare weather patterns, unusual shifts in sand, and the disappearance or reappearance of water sources. Their experience forms a kind of map that cannot be replaced by any object or instrument. They recall where storms once carved new channels, where herds moved in a particular year, and where the sand hardened after a distant rain. Younger travelers depend on these recollections because nothing in the desert stays fixed long enough to guarantee safety without human memory to interpret it. Elders also serve as decision makers. They determine not only which direction the group will follow, but also when the movement will begin. Timing becomes as important as direction in an environment where heat, wind, and scarcity shift constantly. Some years require an earlier departure to avoid the hottest part of the season. Other years allow for a delay because rainfall has extended grazing conditions. These decisions are not made quickly. They are shaped by observing specific patterns: the quality of the grass, the level of moisture in the air, the behavior of animals, and the subtle signals carried by wind. All these cues merge into a single conclusion made by those who have lived long enough to recognize their meaning. Seasonal shifts influence every decision. In colder months, winds behave differently, traveling along paths that provide clearer orientation. Water retains more stability, and certain areas become safer for resting. During hotter periods, routes must shorten and schedules must tighten to avoid exhausting both people and animals. Elders weigh these conditions carefully, knowing that a misjudgment can place the entire group at risk. Their role is not symbolic. It is essential for survival. Knowledge of ancient migration routes is not taught in a structured manner. It is absorbed through repeated exposure. Young members of the tribe walk behind older ones, memorize distances willingly or unwillingly, and grow familiar with certain patterns without fully understanding them at first. Only after many journeys do they begin to recognize the deeper logic behind each decision. This gradual learning ensures that the tribe's movement continues seamlessly even when elders eventually pass away. Their memory becomes distributed among the next generation, preventing the loss of critical knowledge. These routes may appear invisible to outsiders. Someone unfamiliar with the desert sees only open land, identical horizons, and shifting dunes. But for those who have traveled the same paths for decades, distinct features stand out: subtle rises in the ground, certain textures of sand, clusters of stones, and the shape of distant ridges. Even the direction of the wind carries recognizable information. These elements combine to create a familiar rhythm that guides the tribe forward. Tradition shapes not only the path itself, but also the behavior surrounding it. Groups may travel in specific formations, maintain particular rest intervals, or stop at locations out of respect for ancestral patterns. These practices endure because they have functioned well enough to guarantee survival. The desert does not forgive mistakes easily, and any method that proves reliable tends to remain unchanged. Although modern tools could assist, many tribes continue to rely on their inherited pathways. These methods have withstood conditions far harsher than a single season might suggest. Most importantly, they anchor communities within a system that does not depend on external objects. When storms strike or visibility collapses, tradition becomes the only secure reference. Elders also remain attentive to subtle changes that require adjustment to familiar routes. A dried well, an altered dune formation, or a shift in seasonal winds can require redirecting the tribe slightly from the usual path. They do not cling rigidly to tradition. They adapt it carefully, ensuring continuity without ignoring reality. Their ability to adjust while still holding the structure of the route intact is a key reason these pathways survive across generations. For travelers outside these communities, the desert feels uncertain and unstable. For those guided by inherited routes, it becomes organized, predictable, and manageable. Each journey reinforces the knowledge, turning it into a steady experience that can be passed on again. Ancient routes continue because memory and observation keep them stable. Elders carry the direction of each season through experience that cannot be replaced. Further ahead choices respond not only to tradition, but also to weather shifts and the signs carried by animals and clouds. Movement across the desert is never fixed. Even the most experienced travelers understand that a planned route exists only as long as the environment allows it. Weather changes without warning, and animals alter their behavior long before people notice what is coming. Because of this, direction must remain flexible. A safe path one week can become dangerous the next, and those who cross the desert learn to read these shifts with quiet discipline. Their decisions are not made from impulse, but from careful observation that develops through years of repetition. Rain becomes one of the clearest signals that a route must change. In the desert, rainfall does not follow predictable patterns, and a sudden storm can reshape dunes, fill depressions with water, or soften the ground in ways that slow movement. When rain falls at an unusual time, travelers recognize that the conditions ahead may no longer match their expectations. Water can create temporary obstacles that last for days, making specific paths unstable. Instead of continuing blindly, the group shifts its course to avoid areas where rain might have altered the terrain. This change does not indicate fear. It reflects experience with how sand behaves under moisture. A wrong choice can lead to long delays or unsafe crossings. Unseasonal rain also signals changes in the broader climate. Travelers who have crossed the same region for decades compare the timing of storms with previous seasons. If rain arrives earlier or later than expected, they understand that other environmental changes may follow. These observations influence not only direction but also speed, rest intervals, and the choice of shelter along the way. Rain in the desert is rare enough that any deviation becomes meaningful. Migration patterns of birds provide another layer of guidance. These patterns shift in response to temperature, wind, and distant weather systems. Travelers watch birds not for beauty but for information. When large groups of birds alter their flight direction, it suggests climate changes that may affect the desert's conditions in the days ahead. Birds often react sooner than humans to approaching storms or pressure changes. Their movements hint at shifts in air currents long before they reach the ground. If migrating birds begin flying lower than usual, it may indicate strong winds approaching. If they travel in unfamiliar formations or at unusual times, it suggests instability in seasonal weather patterns. Traveling groups pay attention to these signals and adjust their route accordingly. They may choose a path with more sheltered terrain or avoid areas where wind could become hazardous. These adjustments reflect respect for the desert's unpredictability, guided by observation rather than speculation. Wind becomes another decisive factor. In particular, early cold winds carry meaning. When cold air arrives sooner than expected, it signals an approaching shift in season. The desert cools rapidly under such conditions, and the temperature drop affects both movement and rest. Animals respond to this change as well, altering their behavior in ways that travelers learn to recognize. Cold wind can also accelerate the formation of new dunes, making certain areas harder to cross. When the early cold wind touches the land, travelers increase their pace. This acceleration is not hurried or reckless. It is a controlled adjustment meant to reach safer regions before conditions become harsher. Cold wind can signal longer nights, unpredictable storms, or reduced availability of water. Responding quickly ensures that the group stays ahead of these developments. Even slight temperature changes carry weight in decisions, reflecting how sensitive desert life is to variations in climate. Combining these signals becomes essential. Rain, bird movement, and wind do not operate independently. They form a network of clues. Experienced travelers interpret them together, adjusting direction not once but repeatedly as the environment shifts. They do not rely on a single sign. They look for patterns, a cold wind following unusual bird migration, or rainfall coinciding with animals moving in new directions. These patterns reveal larger trends that determine the safest and most efficient route. Elders within the group read these signs with particular skill. They have lived through enough seasons to recognize subtle patterns. Their guidance helps the group avoid areas where storms may gather or winds may intensify. Younger members learn by observing them, understanding how to connect weather and animal behavior into practical decisions. No written map captures these relationships. The desert itself becomes the source of knowledge, and each journey strengthens the ability to interpret it. The lack of fixed markers in the desert means that these environmental cues become as important as any physical direction. The land hides its changes under layers of sand, but the sky and wind reveal what lies ahead. Animals sense danger earlier than humans, and their reactions offer warnings that cannot be ignored. Travelers who fail to read these signals risk entering regions that may soon become impassable. Over time, these observations form an unspoken framework that guides movement. No single storm or wind pattern determines the choice. Instead, it is the accumulation of many subtle signs. The desert rewards those who remain attentive and patient, adjusting their course quietly as conditions demand. This approach allows travelers to continue safely even when the environment shifts without warning. Environmental signs shape decisions long before danger becomes visible. Weather and animal behavior combine to guide each step across unstable terrain. Deeper into the journey, another form of navigation brings the movement toward its final layers of memory and meaning. A long journey across the desert often settles into memory, the way quiet air settles over cooling sand, and reaching this final point feels like arriving at a still place where movement no longer matters. The desert has its own way of ending stories. It does not close anything sharply. It lets the air calm itself, lets the body slow its rhythm, and allows the mind to ease into rest. You have walked through signs carried by wind, light stars, instinct, and the old skills of people who crossed empty distances with nothing but natural cues. All of that brings you here to a moment without direction and without urgency. Night in the desert brings a temperature drop that arrives almost instantly. The silence becomes heavier, shaping the world into a stillness that rests close to the skin. Warm sand beneath the body releases the last heat of the day, while the sky opens above with shapes that stay fixed, no matter how quickly the dunes shift by morning. These constellations once guided whole tribes, repeating their patterns with quiet reliability, as if waiting for another traveler to read them. There is nothing left to prepare for now. No need to measure distance by footsteps, no need to match breadth to terrain, no need to read the surface of the sand for direction. Those belong to the movement, and the movement has stopped. Your breath can lengthen into steady, slow lines, vanishing into the night without a trace. The desert keeps no record of these small releases. They exist only for a moment, and then drift away, leaving the night unchanged. Heaviness in the body is natural here. Long stories settle into muscles the same way long travel settles into bone. Even without physical effort, the mind holds weight after listening to details of endurance and quiet survival. The desert teaches something simple about rest. Stopping is not failure. Stopping sustains life. People who lived here understood this. letting stillness rebuild the strength needed for the next day's direction. With each breath, the world loosens slightly. Light dims, air cools, thoughts slow. The desert at night offers this shift without asking anything in return. The land that felt vast and demanding during the day becomes calm and even. The horizon dissolves into shadow, and nothing presses for attention. Rest becomes almost automatic. A faint breeze may pass across the top of a dune in your imagination, thin and steady. It carries no warning, no instruction, no urgency. It simply moves the same way breath moves before sleep. Nomads once listened to this wind to understand the coming day, but you have no route to prepare. The breeze becomes a background sound that steadies the mind rather than a guide that shapes the next step. When your eyes begin to close, allow them to settle. The night sky above the desert fills with slow, precise points of light. They do not rush into place. They appear gradually, one by one, holding a kind of order that does not require interpretation. Travelers once depended on these fixed points to cross dangerous spaces, but tonight they exist only for calm. You do not need to trace any path through them. You only need to look as long as it feels natural, then let the scene fade. The sand beneath you cools further, reminding you that the day has ended fully. Heat belongs to daylight, not to this moment. Darkness spreads evenly, creating a surface that invites the body to release tension. You may sink deeper into your resting place, letting muscles shift into slower patterns. Far from you, in this imagined desert animal, tracks soften into blurred marks. A camel may have passed earlier, following a route learned through instinct rather than taught by words. It rests now the same way you do. The night does not demand preparation or planning. It replaces worry with stillness, allowing everything to fade into quiet distance. If thoughts rise, let them pass without effort. The desert never holds anything for long. Wind clears footprints, storms reshape dunes, and the memory of movement fades during sleep. This natural erasing carries comfort. It tells you that nothing from the day needs to remain on your shoulders as you rest. You may let it go the same way the desert lets the surface shift freely. The longer you stay in this calm, the more your body aligns with the slow rhythm of the night. Shoulders lower, breath deepens. The heartbeat settles into an even pace. The desert's people once slept under open skies with the same trust, knowing that morning arrives whether watched or not. You may allow the same trust here. Nothing is required from you. When sleep approaches, welcome it without hesitation. You have reached the end of a landscape built from ancient navigation, patient movement, and steady awareness. There is no more distance left to measure. The night is wide enough to hold you, and quiet enough to guide you into rest. Take one more slow breath. Let your eyes fully close. Let your body loosen. The same way warm sand relaxes after releasing the last heat of the day. The desert is silent. The wind is light. The sky is steady. Nothing pulls you forward now. Good night. Rest well. Sleep deeply.